The sound of splintering wood echoed through the quiet house as the front door slammed shut. Evelyn Carter sat frozen at the old wooden table in the center of her modest suburban home. Her son, her only child, Edward Carter, had just locked her inside as if she were a criminal in her own dwelling. His voice, cold and sharp, still vibrated in her memory. "You'll rot here. The only way you're leaving is in a coffin. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of From. I want to know how far it's traveled, because this story is going to leave you speechless." At 66, after years of sacrifice, Evelyn was not honored as a mother. She was treated like a prisoner, humiliated by the very blood she had carried within her. The pain was not a passing sting, it was crushing, unbearable agony. Every breath reminded her of the betrayal. For decades she had convinced herself that Edward loved her. She recalled his small hand clutching hers when he was a child, the nights she stitched clothes by candlelight, the mornings she walked miles to work so he could eat. When his father abandoned them, Evelyn became both mother and father, holding together their lives with nothing but courage and persistence. Every sacrifice had been a thread woven into the fabric of her devotion. She had skipped meals, gone without shoes, and mortgaged this very house so Edward could attend college. She believed that such love would one day return as gratitude, but gratitude never came. Instead came Veronica. From the first moment Veronica entered their lives, Evelyn sensed danger. The young woman's eyes skimmed over her as though she were an inconvenience. Her smile was painted, her words dripping with false sweetness. And Edward, her Edward, drank in that poison as if it were truth. The wedding was Evelyn's first humiliation. Veronica arranged everything without so much as a glance toward the woman who had raised the groom. Evelyn wore a simple blue dress she bought secondhand, sitting invisible among satin gowns and rented tuxedos. When the officiant spoke of honoring parents, Veronica squeezed Edward's hand possessively, her gaze daring Evelyn to object. Later that night, Evelyn overheard Veronica and her mother laughing. Their words pierced her heart. "Edward is too soft with his mother. Those days are over." She swallowed her tears, waiting for Edward to defend her. He did not. His silence was the cruelest betrayal of all. The distance grew with each passing month. Weekly visits dwindled into hurried appearances, always orchestrated by Veronica. She spoke of higher circles and better neighborhoods, dismissing Evelyn's simple wooden house as an embarrassment. Edward sat beside her, nodding quietly, as though each contemptuous word was gospel. The boy who once begged Evelyn for comfort now looked at her with shame. Her meals, once his favorite, were refused. Her conversations, once his joy, were cut short. And then came the day that broke her when illness struck and left her weak, fevered, and frightened. Edward chose to spend the evening at a dinner party instead of at her bedside. "I need you, Edward," she begged on the phone, her voice trembling. "Marlene Veronica says adults take care of themselves," he replied coolly. "Don't be dramatic." That night, drenched in sweat and tears, Evelyn realized she had lost her son not to death, but to something worse, indifference. Grace Miller, the neighbor who had lived down the road for 30 years, was the one who saved her. Grace brought soup medicine and steady words. "Evelyn," she said gently, "a son who can abandon his mother like this. Something is wrong. Something is very wrong." Those words cut, but they also awakened her. Love was not supposed to humiliate. Family was not supposed to abandon. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in her bedroom, Evelyn found an envelope tucked into the back of her sewing chest. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the handwriting. It was from her late husband. Her hands shook as she opened it. In uneven scrawls, he had written, "Evelyn, you must be careful with Edward. He is bright, yes, but selfish. If he grows without boundaries, he may become cruel. Promise me you will stay strong even against him." Tears blurred her eyes. Her husband had seen the truth decades earlier. Evelyn had ignored it. She had watered the seed of selfishness with her sacrifices until it grew into the poison tree now strangling her. For the first time, she allowed herself to admit it. She had not only lost her son, she had raised the very hand that struck her down. From that moment, something inside her hardened. Tears dried into salt. Her spine straightened. Humiliation transformed into resolve. If Edward wanted space, he would have it, but on her terms. If Veronica wanted boundaries, Evelyn would build walls stronger than steel. So when Edward appeared one evening demanding that she cook his wife's favorite meal for a party, Evelyn looked him in the eye and said the words she had never dared before. Nomra Edward froze. His silence stretched his eyes wide in disbelief. "What do you mean?" "No, I have other plans," she said calmly, though her heart pounded in her chest. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt power returning to her veins. That night, she lay awake in her wooden house, listening to the creaks of the floorboards and the rustling of the trees outside. For decades, this home had been her cage, the place where her sacrifices became invisible. But now, it was becoming something else. It was her fortress. And though the storm was just beginning, Evelyn Carter knew she would no longer cower. She would fight. The words echoed in my skull like hammers striking iron. "You're going to rot here. The only way you'll ever leave is in a coffin." My son's voice, the voice I had once cherished as the sweetest music in my life, now sounded like the sentence of a merciless executioner. He shoved me violently inside the small cabin, and before I could even steady myself, I heard the sickening crash of my phone hitting the wooden floor, shattering into pieces. That sharp sound was the final nail sealing me off from the outside world. The lock clicked shut from the other side. My last connection to safety was gone. Suddenly, silence wrapped around me, suffocating and absolute. No food, no water, no way to call for help. Just four walls that smelled of mildew and abandonment, and the knowledge that my only child, the boy I had given my very life for, was the one who had trapped me here. At 66 years old, after decades of sacrifice, I was no longer a mother in his eyes. I was a burden, a nuisance to be discarded like trash. My chest tightened, and my heart pounded against my ribs as if it were trying to escape the prison my son had built for me. I could barely breathe. I felt crushed, suffocated, gutted by the truth. The bond I had believed unbreakable had been shattered beyond repair. From the time Henry was 8 and his father walked out on us, I had devoted every ounce of strength, every waking breath, to raising him. I became both father and mother, protector and provider. As a young seamstress with calloused hands, I worked until my fingers bled. Every dollar I earned went to giving him opportunities I never had. I remember one rainy Tuesday in October, when Henry came home crying because children mocked his worn-out sneakers. That night, I silently took the money I had saved for a new dress and spent it on the best shoes in the store. His smile the next morning was enough to make me feel like the richest woman alive. That was my life. Years of sacrifices no one asked me to make, but ones I gave freely because love demanded it. When he turned 16, I worked double shifts to buy him the motorcycle he had dreamed of. When he turned 21, I mortgaged my small home to pay for his engineering degree. Never once did I complain. Never once did I ask for repayment. All I wanted was his love and respect. For a time, I thought I had it. He graduated with honors, found a job, and used to visit me proudly, taking me to dinners, thanking me for everything. But then came Marlene, and with her, the slow unraveling of everything I had believed was permanent. From the first moment I met Marlene, something inside me recoiled. Her smile was polished but cold, her tone polite but laced with disdain. She looked at me as though I were a relic, an obstacle standing in her way. I tried to win her over. I cooked her favorite dishes, bought her gifts I could scarcely afford, and even learned new recipes just to please her. But every effort was met with that sugar-coated cruelty. "Ella don't go to so much trouble," she'd say, though. Her eyes flashed with contempt. When they married, she orchestrated every detail of the wedding, as if I didn't exist. I sat in the front row in a discount green dress, feeling invisible, while my son vowed his life to a woman who had already stolen him from me. That night, I overheard her telling her mother Henry is too soft with his mom. We'll need to set boundaries. She thinks she still matters, but those days are over. My heart cracked, but I swallowed my pain, hoping my son would one day see through her mask. It was during those lonely months after the wedding that I stumbled upon something that haunted me even more. Cleaning my closet one night, I found an envelope tucked behind an old stack of blankets. It was a letter written years ago by Henry's father, the man who had abandoned us. In it, he had written words that chilled me, Ella, one day. Henry will grow to resent you. He will see your sacrifices not as gifts, but as chains. And when that day comes, he will cast you aside just as I did. At the time, I had dismissed it as the bitter venom of a cowardly man who couldn't handle responsibility. But now, in that dark cabin, those words came back with brutal clarity. My son had become the prophecy his father had left behind. The betrayal wasn't only happening, it had been foreseen, and I had been too blind, too hopeful to stop it. The first sharp wound of betrayal came months before the cabin when Henry first told me he needed space. I had cooked his favorite chicken stew, expecting warmth, but instead he sat across from me, cold and distant, and said, "I can't keep being responsible for your happiness." I felt my soul rip apart. After all the years of sacrifice, my son wasn't grateful he was suffocated, not loved but resented, not cherished but blamed. From then, his visits dwindled. Marlene's whispers grew louder, her sneers more obvious. They laughed about buying a bigger house, moving into a gated community, while treating me like a decaying burden. And the final blow when I asked Henry to accompany me to a doctor's appointment out of fear, he said no. His wife had a dinner. I was alone. That loneliness carved scars deeper than any physical wound. And now here I was, trapped in this forsaken cabin, my only lifeline destroyed at my son's hands. He had left me here while he and Marlene boarded a cruise ship with her manipulative mother, laughing, celebrating, and living a life built on my sacrifices. The air inside the cabin was thick as if pressing down on my chest, making each breath harder. Hunger gnawed at me. Thirst scorched my throat, but worse than either was the anguish of knowing that my son's love had been not just diminished, but obliterated. I was no longer his mother. I was an inconvenience, an obstacle, something to be erased. I sank onto the wooden floor, my tears soaking into the dust, and for the first time in my life, I whispered aloud the words that had long clawed at the back of my mind. Was it all a mistake? Did I waste my life on someone who never loved me at all? The silence that followed was louder than any scream. And so my story began not with a stranger's cruelty, but with the crushing betrayal of my own son. The boy I had raised with every fiber of my being had become the man who locked me in this prison of despair. Now I ask you, listening to my voice, if your own child betrayed you like this, would you still forgive? Press 0 for yes. Press 1 for no. One of the cabin walls pressed closer with every passing hour. In part 1, I told you how Henry shoved me inside and destroyed my phone. But the true torment began after the silence settled, after the sound of their car faded into the distance. That silence was not peace, it was suffocating like a pillow, pressed hard against my face, forcing me to breathe through fear. I sat on the wooden floor clutching my aching chest and wondered how a lifetime of sacrifice could end like this. My son was not simply absent, he had chosen to discard me like an old coat that no longer fit his polished life. It wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. The first night, the air inside the cabin grew so cold I could see my breath. My stomach twisted with hunger, but worse was the thirst. Each swallow felt like sand grinding down my throat. My head pounded, my body trembled, and all I could think was, this is how animals die, trapped and forgotten. I cried out into the night, screaming Henry's name, screaming Marlene's name, even though I knew they were probably dancing on a cruise ship deck sipping champagne. My voice echoed off the wooden walls and came back to me like mockery. It was despair so heavy it pinned me to the floor. I had given him everything. Now he had given me nothing worse than nothing. He had given me abandonment. The next morning, when the pale light crept in through the cracks, I crawled toward the door. My hands bled as I clawed at the wood, begging for someone to hear me. But no one came. Not a neighbor, not a passerby, no one. The realization sank like lead into my chest. I wasn't just forgotten. I was intentionally discarded, like trash left out for the vultures. And in that moment, I remembered Marlene's words at the wedding. She thinks she still matters, but those days are over. Yes, they were over. And my son had made sure of it. But that wasn't the worst discovery. On the second day, while rummaging through the cabin, I found a small device tucked behind a loose plank in the wall. It was a tape recorder. My hands shook as I pressed play. Crackling voices filled the air, Henry's and Marlene's. "Keep it hidden," Marlene whispered. "I want to know what she says when she's alone. I want proof she's unstable. That way, if she ever causes trouble, we'll have the evidence to put her in a home." Henry's voice replied, "Good idea. She talks to herself all the time. We'll make her sound crazy." I dropped the recorder, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Not only had they abandoned me, they had spied on me, planned against me, plotted my erasure with cruel precision. That moment was worse than the lock clicking on the door. It was proof that my son hadn't just betrayed me out of weakness. He had conspired against me. He wanted to erase me. That night, I screamed louder than ever before. I screamed not just Henry's name, but God's. I screamed into the pitch-black night, demanding an answer, demanding justice. No answer came. Only the scratching of rats in the corners, only the howl of wind through the cracks. I pressed my forehead against the cold floorboards and whispered, "Why? Why did I waste my life on him? Why did I bleed for him, work for him, love him, if this was all I was worth?" The cabin swallowed my words. The darkness swallowed me whole. In part 1, I told you how I found a letter from Henry's father predicting this betrayal. Now, with the recorder in my hands, I realized the prophecy had not just come true, it had exceeded itself. My son had not only rejected me, he had turned me into his enemy. I thought I had hit the bottom of despair when he refused to take me to the doctor. But this, being left to rot, spied on, manipulated, this was a deeper hell than I had ever imagined. Days blurred together. I marked them by scratching lines into the wood with a rusted nail I found. 1, 2, 3. I didn't know how much longer I could survive without food or clean water. And as I lay there weaker each day, I thought of all the stories I had once read, stories of betrayal, survival, vengeance. I realized that my own story could have been one of those Reddit revenge stories. Ordinary mothers abandoned ordinary people crushed by family only to rise again. Except mine hadn't reached the part of rising. Not yet. Each time I thought of those Reddit revenge stories, I wondered, would strangers on the internet care more about my pain than my own son did? Would they read my story and weep when he could not even call me once? And then I laughed bitterly, because perhaps the only justice left for me was to become another example, another headline, another case of blood betraying blood in the cruelest way. Perhaps one day someone would scroll past my tale on a list of Reddit revenge stories and think, how could a child do that to their mother? By the 6th night, I no longer screamed. My voice was gone, my lips were cracked, my body frail. But the pain was sharper than ever. The crushing truth settled over me like a shroud. Henry did not love me anymore. Maybe he never had. Maybe all along I had been feeding a black hole, pouring my life into a void that could never return love. That realization hurt more than the hunger, more than the thirst, more than the cold. It tore my soul apart. I lay in that cabin, trembling, bleeding, whispering into the shadows. Why did he do this to me? And now I turn that question to you. If your child, your own flesh and blood, spied on you, discarded you, left you to rot, would you still hold on to hope, or would you let that hope die? If you think hope should survive, press 0. If you think hope is gone forever, press 1. The recorder lay in my lap like a venomous snake, its crackling playback still echoing in my ears. Marlene's voice cold and calculated, whispering about proof, about making me sound insane. Henry's agreement, his eager compliance. In part 2, I told you how I found it hidden inside the cabin wall. That discovery was not just another wound, it was lightning striking my soul. For days, I had drowned in despair. I had screamed into the dark until my voice broke, felt myself discarded like garbage, abandoned by the only person I had ever lived for. But hearing their voices, that was the spark. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't sorrow. It was rage, pure and incandescent, burning through every bone in my body. At first I trembled so violently I could hardly breathe. My hands shook, my chest heaved, and my eyes filled with a fury I had never known. It felt as though my veins carried fire instead of blood. I wasn't merely betrayed. I was hunted, cornered, erased deliberately by the very child I had once cradled in my arms. The grief that had suffocated me cracked apart like brittle wood under a storm. What rose from the splinters was something fierce and unyielding. I pressed my palms against the cabin floor, stood shakily, and declared into the empty air, no more. It was as if a veil lifted from my eyes. Suddenly, I could see every sacrifice clearly, for what it was not proof of love returned, but proof of my blindness. I thought of the long nights stitching until my fingers bled, the meals skipped so Henry could have more, the house mortgaged to pay for his degree. For years, I had convinced myself that motherhood meant obliteration of the self. But in this stifling cabin, with the taste of betrayal raw in my mouth, I realized the truth. Love without respect is slavery. The awakening was like a bolt of lightning, blinding, shocking, impossible to ignore. In that instant, I knew I had wasted decades kneeling at an altar that gave nothing back, and I vowed it would end. Rage is a dangerous fuel. But in that moment, it was the only thing keeping me alive. I felt the hunger, the thirst, the weakness of my aging body, but also the fire surging higher than ever. I looked around the cabin once, a prison now a battlefield. Broken boards, rusted nails, shards of glass from my shattered phone, weapons, symbols, proof that even in abandonment there was still power waiting to be seized. I remembered stories I had read of mothers and fathers betrayed by their children, tales that echoed in the hidden corners of the internet. They called them Reddit family tales, accounts of ordinary parents rising against cruelty, reclaiming dignity after being trampled. Now I understood why those stories resonated so deeply, because they weren't just tales. They were survival manuals. And I decided mine would not end in silence. On the third day, with the recorder still in my possession, I stopped begging for rescue. I stopped calling Henry's name. Instead, I whispered plans. I began testing the boards on the walls, searching for weakness. I used my nails, torn and bleeding, to scratch at them. Each small splinter that came loose felt like a victory, and with every victory came a louder promise in my heart. They wanted proof of my instability. I will give them proof of my strength. That recorder meant to destroy me would become my weapon. That betrayal meant to erase me would become my evidence. It struck me that my story, my suffering, my very breath in that cabin could one day become more than tragedy. It could be testimony. It could be the kind of story strangers whisper to each other when they want to remember the strength of the human spirit. I smiled bitterly, imagining some future reader finding my words among Reddit family tales, gasping at how a mother once discarded like trash had risen like fire against her own blood. That thought no longer shamed me. It fueled me, because I was done being Henry's victim. I was ready to become his reckoning. I paced the cabin like a caged lioness, each step making me stronger, each breath stoking the fire within me. Hunger gnawed thirst, clawed, but anger burned hotter than both. I thought of Henry's face, the coldness in his eyes when he said he needed space. I thought of Marlene's sneer when she called me old-fashioned. I thought of the letter from Henry's father warning me that this day would come, and I whispered aloud, "You were right. But you also underestimated me. It was not just survival anymore. It was justice, and I would not rest until they felt the flames of what they had ignited. I did not know how long I could last in that place, but I knew this: if I lived, the world would hear my story. They would know what my son had done, what his wife had plotted, what their greed had driven them to attempt. And if I died, I would die on my feet, not crawling, not begging. I would leave behind scratches in the wood, broken boards, a recorder filled with their poisonous words, a trail of truth they could never erase. For the first time in weeks, I felt something powerful surge through me, control. I was not powerless. I was not broken. I was fire. That night, as I sat in the dark, the recorder pressed to my chest, I whispered a vow. This story will not end in silence. This story will end in flames. And now I turn to you, listening to my voice. Do you feel the fire building? Do you hear it in the way this story unfolds? The fire I had found in part 3 still burned in my chest when the sound of tires crunching on gravel jolted me upright. Rage had kept me alive, fury had given me clarity, but nothing prepared me for the storm that walked through my front door that morning. Henry and Marlene. They didn't knock. They didn't wait. They barged in like conquerors entering land they already claimed. My son's face was hard, his jaw tight, but it was Marlene who spoke first. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness, "it seems you've had time to think. Are you ready to be reasonable now?" My hand tightened on the hidden recorder I kept near me at all times. My heartbeat thundered so loud it drowned out the ticking clock on the wall. The air between us felt thin, sharp, dangerous. This was no visit. This was a siege. I rose slowly from my chair, forcing myself to meet Henry's eyes. For a second, I thought I saw hesitation there, the flicker of the boy I had raised. But then his expression hardened into something unrecognizable. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, slapping it onto the table. "It's a simple agreement, Mom. You sign it and everything is settled. No more arguments, no more drama." Marlene leaned forward, opening the folder with deliberate grace. My eyes fell on the paper inside. Legal jargon filled the page, but the meaning was clear. It was a transfer of ownership. My house, my savings, my entire life handed to them with the stroke of a pen. The tension in the room thickened until I could scarcely breathe. My throat clenched. My pulse roared in my ears. It was as if a knife pressed against my neck, its blade waiting to slice if I refused. "Sign it." Henry ordered, his voice low and controlled, "and we can all move on. You'll have a comfortable place at a facility we've chosen. You'll be taken care of. All you have to do is stop fighting." "And if I don't," I whispered. Marlene's smile widened. "Then you'll find out what real loneliness feels like. No one will believe your accusations. We'll make sure of it. We already have enough recordings to show you're unstable." The words struck like a judge's gavel. A sentence of social death, of exile, of being declared unfit to manage my own life. They weren't just threatening to take my home. They were threatening to erase me. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. This was no longer about property or money. This was annihilation written in ink and sealed with betrayal. I forced myself to look closer at the papers spread across the table. My name was already signed on some of them. The signature was mine, but I had never touched those pages. A cold realization pierced me. They had forged my handwriting. They had prepared for this moment long before walking through my door. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had rehearsed it, plotted it, executed it with precision. This was their death duel, and they expected me to surrender without a fight. But they underestimated me. "You forged this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Henry flinched, but Marlene's smirk held. "Call it what you like. No one will care. By the time you figure out how to fight it, it'll be too late. Courts move slowly. We'll already own everything." I looked at my son, my only child, and asked the question that had burned in me since the cabin. "How did you become this?" He clenched his fists. "You made me this way. You never gave me space. You smothered me with your sacrifices, your endless guilt. This is survival, Mom. Mine, not yours." The words sliced deeper than any blade, but beneath the pain, something inside me solidified into iron. "You may think this is survival," I said, my voice shaking with fury, "but it's murder. You're killing what little family you had left." Marlene rolled her eyes. "Enough speeches. Sign or we'll handle it without you." The duel had begun. The air grew so heavy it was hard to draw breath. My vision narrowed. It felt like standing in front of a firing squad waiting for the bullet. Every second stretched, every heartbeat screamed. My hands hovered over the pen. I could feel the trap closing their eyes on me like predators waiting for their prey to surrender. But then I remembered the fire of part 3, the lightning awakening the vow I made in that dark cabin. I was no prey, I was no victim, I was the flame. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed the papers back across the table. "No," I said. Henry's face darkened. Marlene's smile vanished. "What did you say?" she hissed. "No," I repeated louder this time. "I will not sign. You want to erase me. You want to declare me unfit. Do it. But know this, I have proof. I have your voices. I have every word you thought would stay hidden. And if I disappear, if anything happens to me, those words will not disappear with me." I saw the flicker of fear cross Marlene's eyes. Henry shifted uncomfortably, his bravado faltering. The knife they had pressed to my throat now hovered uncertainly in the air. The battlefield had shifted. They didn't back down. They didn't admit defeat. But they didn't win either. Marlene gathered the papers with trembling hands, shoving them back into the folder. Henry's voice cracked when he spoke. "You'll regret this." I straightened my spine, my voice steady with the force of a storm. "No, son. I regret nothing now. The only regret left is yours." They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. The silence that followed was different this time. Not suffocating, not crushing. Electric. Alive. This duel wasn't over. But for the first time, I knew I had struck back. In part 3, I told you how I discovered the fire of defiance. In this part, that fire met the knife's edge, and though the blade cut deep, it did not finish me. This was no longer a story of survival. It was a story of war. And the next battle would decide everything. The echo of the slammed door from part 4 still trembled in my walls long after Henry and Marlene left. My hands shook, but not from fear this time. From fury and from something else, something I had not felt in years. Control. I had stared down their forged papers, their smug threats, their knife edge of coercion, and I had not bent. For once it was not me cowering in silence. It was them retreating with unease in their eyes. But the duel was not over. It had only moved to its next battlefield. That night, sleep refused to come. My body ached from tension, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of my old wooden home, and whispered to myself, "They want to erase me. I will erase their lies first." On the table lay 2 weapons the recorder filled with their poisonous words and the forged documents they had left behind in their rush. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages again. My signature, My handwriting, perfectly copied in places I had never signed. Every stroke was a blade, every forged line proof of their intent to kill me, not with knives, but with pens and lies. And for the first time, I smiled, because in their arrogance, they had handed me the rope to hang them with. The next morning, I made a call not to the police, not yet, but to someone I trusted with my life, Harold Whitman. Harold was a retired lawyer, a man I had known for over 30 years at church. He had buried his wife last winter, and we had comforted each other in grief. When I told him everything, the cabin, the threats, the forged papers, his silence on the other end of the line was heavy, furious. "Bring me what you have," he said finally, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Do not confront them alone again. This is no longer just betrayal. This is crime." When I arrived at his small office clutching the recorder and papers, Harold's sharp eyes widened as he read. "This isn't just forgery, Ella," he said, slamming his hand against the desk. "This is elder abuse, coercion, fraud. If we move carefully, we can expose them completely." For the first time in weeks, hope flared inside me, not the fragile, desperate hope of a mother clinging to love, but the fierce, burning hope of a warrior with allies. Harold laid out the plan like a general preparing for war. "We need witnesses. We need timing. Let them come to you again. This time, we'll be ready." The idea sent shivers down my spine, but I nodded. Fear no longer ruled me. Justice did. For days, I prepared my house as though it were a battlefield. Harold brought discreet recording equipment hidden in the corners of my living room. Grace Miller, my loyal neighbor, agreed to be present as a silent witness. And Mark Reynolds, a local journalist Harold trusted, promised to come if the confrontation escalated. It was all or nothing now. Either I would burn in the fire or they would. The chance came sooner than expected. Henry and Marlene returned arrogance painted on their faces. Marlene tossed the folder back onto my table. "You had time to think," she said coldly. "This is your last chance." My heart thundered, but I forced calm. I sat straight, my eyes steady. "You're right," I said softly. "I did think, and I have made my decision." Henry leaned forward. "Good. Then sign." I pushed the folder back toward them. "No. And I want you both to listen carefully." I pressed play on the recorder. Their own voices filled the room. Marlene's hissed whisper about making me sound insane. Henry's cold agreement. Their faces drained of color. And then Harold stepped from the adjoining room, his presence like a hammer of judgment. "That's enough," he said firmly. The air crackled like a storm about to break. Marlene sputtered. Henry stammered, but Harold held up the forged papers, his voice rising like thunder. "You've committed fraud, forgery, coercion. Every word you've spoken, every signature you forged, it's all documented. You tried to destroy your own mother, and now the law will destroy you." At that moment, Grace stepped in with her steady eyes, and Mark Reynolds raised his camera, the red light blinking. The truth was no longer hidden. It was exposed, recorded, undeniable. Henry's face twisted with fury. Marlene shrieked, "You can't prove!" But Harold cut her off, his voice booming. "It's already proven. By your own hands, by your own words. Justice will burn through your lies like fire." The sound of their protest was drowned out by the weight of truth, crashing down like a storm. I stood then taller than I had in years. My voice was no longer frail. It was fierce. "You tried to lock me away," I said, my words cutting like blades. "You tried to silence me, erase me, bury me alive. But today I bury your lies instead. This house will not be your trophy. My life will not be your property. Justice has already chosen its side, and it is not yours." The look in their eyes was priceless. Panic, rage, the realization that the game was over. It was liberation that roared through me, fierce as wildfire, consuming every chain they had wrapped around my spirit. The next hours blurred. The police were called. Statements were taken. Harold handed over the documents, the recordings, the testimony. Mark promised to publish every detail to make sure the town knew the truth. By nightfall, Henry and Marlene were in custody, charged with forgery and elder abuse. I watched from my porch as the patrol car carried them away, their faces pale, their arrogance shattered, and I laughed. Not a gentle laugh, but a thunderous, triumphant laugh that shook years of sorrow from my chest. The storm had broken, the thunder had rolled, and justice burned bright, devouring their cruelty like dry wood in a roaring fire. In Part 4, I told you how they cornered me with their forged documents, how the knife of their threats pressed against my throat. In this part, I tell you how that blade was turned back upon them, how the fire of justice reduced their lies to ash. This was not just survival. This was victory. And though the scars remain, the blaze of justice lit the night Henry and Marlene were taken away in the back of a police car. I stood on my porch long after the taillights vanished into the dark. The summer air was cool, the cicadas humming in the trees, and for the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of fear pressing on my chest. In Part 5, I told you how justice burned bright, how the forged documents and their own recorded words sealed their downfall. That fire, that thunder of truth had freed me. Now came the silence after the storm, not a silence of dread, but one of peace, majestic and calm. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and looked up at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter, freer, as if they too were celebrating. The next morning I woke to sunlight streaming through my curtains. It felt different, warmer, more golden. I brewed a cup of tea, sat at my old wooden table, and let the quiet fill me. No threats, no forged papers, no whispered schemes waiting in the shadows. Only the birds outside my window and the steam rising from my cup. Majestic serenity, that was what it was. The kind of peace that only comes after walking through fire and surviving. The kind that makes every small thing, sunlight, birdsong, the smell of tea, feel like treasures. I realized then that peace is not given. Peace is earned, and I had earned mine through struggle, pain, and an unyielding fight for dignity. But peace was not the only gift that morning brought. For as I sipped my tea, I felt something else rise within me, something fierce and liberating, freedom. Not just freedom from Henry's grip or Marlene's cruelty, but freedom from my own chains, the chains of guilt, the chains of believing that motherhood meant endless sacrifice, even when it stripped me of myself. I thought of the years I had silenced my needs for Henry's, the nights I starved so he could eat, the mornings I walked barefoot so he could have shoes. And while love had guided those choices, I now understood something deeper. Love without respect is not love, it is bondage. Like a phoenix, I rose from the ashes of betrayal. My wings spread wide, glowing with fire, not of destruction, but of renewal. I was not just free from them. I was free to live for myself, at last. Over the following weeks, I rebuilt not only my home, but my spirit. Harold helped me secure legal protections. Grace visited me daily with laughter and warmth, and Mark published the story in the local paper. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years came by with casseroles, flowers, even hugs. For once I was not invisible. My story mattered. My survival mattered. Each dawn felt like a radiant rebirth. I planted roses in the garden, their petals bright against the soil. I painted the living room walls a fresh white, covering the stains of years gone by. I played old records and danced alone in the kitchen, my laughter echoing against the walls. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about claiming the present, about stepping into the light after a long, merciless storm. To those listening now, especially to those of you in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not defined by what others take from you, not by betrayal, not by abandonment, not even by family turning their back on you. You are defined by what you rise from. Life will try to crush you. Sometimes the ones who crush you are the very people you gave your soul to. That is a wound deeper than most can bear. But even from those ashes you can rise. Dignity is not something given by others. It is something you claim for yourself. And once you claim it, no one, not even your own flesh and blood, can take it away again. One evening I sat on the porch. As the sun set, the sky ablaze with streaks of orange and gold. Grace sat beside me. Harold waved from across the street, and laughter drifted from children playing nearby. I thought of Henry not with hatred, but with a strange, quiet sorrow. I had lost my son long before the police came. What he chose was his path, and justice had followed him. But I had found something far greater than revenge. I had found rebirth. The storm was over. The dawn was mine. In Part 5, I told you how justice burned like fire, consuming the lies that nearly destroyed me. In this final part, I share the gift that followed: majestic peace, phoenix freedom, radiant rebirth. And to you listening to my story, thank you. Thank you for walking with me through the darkness, for feeling my pain, my rage, my triumph. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength, I invite you. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of courage and truth. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, your lessons, your own journey. And don't forget to watch the next video, because every story, like every dawn, carries the promise of light after the storm.